I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Dr. David Wood, a well-known futurist, author, singularitarian, and chair of the London Futurists. Dr. Wood has an MA in mathematics, graduate studies in the philosophy of science from the University of Cambridge, an honorary doctorate in science from the University of Westminster, and over 30 years of experience in the technology industry, ranging from mobile software and OS development to corporate advisory and leadership. As a futurist, Dr. Wood has served as the co-founder of Transhumanist UK, executive director of Transpolitica, node chair of the Millennium Project, fellow at the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, and his current role is the principal at Delta Wisdom. He also holds board positions at SingularityNet, Systensis, the LEV Foundation, and is a former board member of Humanity Plus. David is the author of 13 books and one of T3's 100 most influential people in technology. His focus is on the radical transformation of society and humanity enabled by technological disruption. So David, welcome back. It is always a pleasure and a true honor to have you with me today, sir.
Well, these shows are great. I always enjoy our conversations, Tim.
Well, so today I am really excited to talk about this topic, and this is something that you have been exploring with the Omni Futurists now for quite a while. But we're talking about a new book that you contributed to entitled Future Visions: How to Survive and Thrive in the Upcoming Economic Singularity, a Variety of Perspectives. And I'm going to put links to the book in the show notes, and you also had a recent presentation where yourself and the other authors discussed this. I'm going to put links to that in as well. It is amazing and well worth people's time. Let me start out with the big question. What is the economic singularity? What prompted this book, and what role did you play in authoring it?
Big questions. Let's see if I can chop them down to size. So the economic singularity is somewhat similar to a concept that's often discussed, namely the technological singularity. They both involve the changing capabilities of AI, artificial intelligence, and robotics and automation. The technological singularity is when we humans are potentially no longer in command. We're no longer the smartest kids on the block. We have been overtaken in terms of intelligence and planning and organizational capabilities by our mind children, artificial intelligence, who might then decide different things about the future of the planet, and we wouldn't be able to influence it differently, no more, say, than chimpanzees can determine the fate of Africa when we humans have a different plan for it. Now, the economic singularity is a slightly different idea. Humans will still be in charge, but potentially there will be no work for most humans, because any jobs that you or I or our friends might consider doing will be done better by robots of various sorts. Hardware robots, software robots, robots that look a little bit like humans, or robots that look nothing like us. So all the jobs that we might have thought we could earn money by doing will be done more reliably, more efficiently, without any hassle by robots. And people have long anticipated that this might happen, but as technology has improved, so far there's always been new jobs for humans to do. But the economic singularity is a prediction that at some stage that will no longer be the case, that although there might be new jobs generated by technology, guess what? It will be the robots or the AIs that are better suited to these new jobs than we humans. So we will all be out of work, and that's the challenge that the economic singularity poses.
Well, again, so many big ideas, and I want to direct people again to the book as well as to the video, which I'm going to link to in the show notes, because there is so much to this topic that it's far more than we can cover today. Now, the book itself is a collection of writings by a number of authors, including Mike DeVerde, Alora Blackstone, Luis Arroyo, Art Ramon, Michael Sands, Alan Crowley, as well as yourself. I'm wondering if you could tell me about some of the contributions that the various authors made to it, and perhaps a couple of the concepts or different themes that jumped out at it the most for you.
So these authors are all connected with this group, the Omni Futurists, which was created, I think, about 2 years ago now, maybe a bit longer, by Mike DeVerde and a number of the others mentioned, although it has grown in size since its initial formation. And it was formed just to look at the economic singularity. If it's coming, what could we do to avoid it being disastrous? Because if we're all out of work and there's no income, there are moral problems, psychological problems, but goodness, there are also economic problems, because the things that we would normally want to spend our money on, well, we wouldn't have money. So what would that mean? And different people reacted in different ways, and these different reactions are captured in this book. Some people say, well, what we need is more capitalism, because capitalism generates new solutions, new capabilities, new things for people to do. Other people say, well, hang on, this more than ever is a time when we need socialism. We need to distribute things more radically than ever before. And that the insights of people like Karl Marx should now be attended to. There are chapters in the book by people who advocate that solution. There are other people who say, well, we need to now accept some amount of cutting back instead of thinking about society and life with more. Most of us humans won't have more. We're going to have to make do in smaller settings with simpler lifestyles. With small is beautiful, to quote the economist E.F. Schumacher. And there is a communitarian approach. There are various other names for it, in which people will help each other in different communities in self-reliant ways. So that's a possibility as well. Now, my chapter in the book takes none of these perspectives, as it happens. It takes a position that I call the mixed market, which is that we can ride through this, but we're going to have to be smart about it. We're going to have to use some of the mechanisms of the free market, but more than ever before, we're going to need to have a democratic control over some of the excesses of the free market, which can include things like distributing too much wealth to the successful in society, leaving too many other people behind. So in my chapter of the book, I actually look at 6 different responses, and I say why I think 3 of them are clear no-starters, despite having a lot of popularity. 2 others are quite attractive, but the 6th one is that we can use technology not just to generate more robots to do work, but if we are smart, we can use technology to reduce the costs of everything and to distribute the fruits of technological abundance to everyone. And so we'll have this benefits of the mixed market. That's the position I outline in that book. But you'll find lots of diverse opinions, and that's entirely right, because frankly, nobody really has a complete handle on how these things will work out, and we need to look at different scenarios and think them all through.
Well, now, having gone through this myself, if I understand the economic singularity concept correctly, this is a prediction of economic disruption and wide-scale unemployment, as you mentioned, created primarily by artificial intelligence automation, but it doesn't have a single causal factor like Kurzweil's technological singularity does. So we're not talking about one single event like, the machine wakes up and becomes sentient and everything changes. In this case, it sounds more like a convergence of events that are already underway, as we'll discuss in a few minutes, from a diverse collection of technologies that were really created to improve economies of scale and efficiency, right?
So these technologies that we're talking about that may take jobs away from people, they all had good motivations to enable things to be produced more reliably, more cheaply. If you have an AI tutor that helps you learn things more quickly instead of having to pay a human, then you can get the benefits of that. Although the human teacher misses out, you as a student benefit. You can have AI robotic surgeons who help do some of the tasks already of surgery. Can't do the whole job yet, but that makes some kind of surgeries much more feasible and economical compared to what they were doing in the past. So yes, these things all had some good rationalization, some good reasoning for them being there, but when you add them all up, it can suddenly tip over. So it's not just going to be one thing like a robot waking up. It's not so much that. It's more that the whole network of AI will be able to learn more quickly than we humans. We already do have this to an extent. When one piece of AI solves a problem, gains a new skill, suddenly all the different computers around the world can be reprogrammed with that new insight faster often than we humans can learn. So we humans might pick up a new skill when we lose our current jobs. This is what happened in the past when there was less jobs on farms because there were more things like combine harvesters and other equipment that was brought in to reduce the requirements for human labor. These humans could retrain and go and work in factories, and then when the factories were automated, humans, all their descendants, could retrain as software engineers, and as more software jobs have been done by AI, the humans retrained as other social media consultants or whatever. But sooner or later, AIs will learn the new jobs faster than us, and that's the transition. It's a changeover from one curve being on top, namely humans learning faster, to the AIs learning faster via, we might call it, not so much an Internet of Things, but an Internet of Robots.
Well, now, in another comparison to Kurzweil's technological singularity, I wanted to ask about the predicted date. Kurzweil's date was 2045 or before for the technological singularity. I'm wondering if there's a predicted date for the economic singularity, or is this something that will happen more slowly due to the inherent inefficiencies, market dependencies, and just plain friction that occurs in the modern economy?
Well, there is friction, which often slows down the adoption of technology slower than people had expected. But that friction sometimes then leads to this transition where things, after going slowly, suddenly go faster. And that's often because it takes a while for things to come into place. If we think about the adoption of electric vehicles, it's not just you need vehicles, you also need charging points. You need a whole network where you can have your cars charged up. If you think about mobile phones, an industry that I know well, that's how I worked for many years, there's no point having mobile phones unless you also have a network. On the other hand, there's no point building out a network if you don't think there's mobile phones. You also needed to have retail stores that knew how to sell mobile phones to people. With smartphones, the network was even more complicated. The system of interdependencies was even more complicated because you needed the people who could write apps, you needed app stores, you needed development tools, and each of them took a while to come into place, which meant that those of us who were involved in the industry were frustrated that it was taking a while, but then it tipped over and went more quickly. So all of that does mean prediction is hard, but we can look at general trends. We can see that AI has got a lot more capable in many aspects in the last few years. Many people have reduced their timelines. That's a phrase means that if you'd asked people before, how long do you think before artificial intelligence is as capable as humans in every cognitive task, people typically might have said in the past maybe 30 years or 50 years, and now they're saying about a half of that, or maybe even less than a half of that. And if they had even longer timelines before, they've still got longer timelines, but again, they've come down in many cases. So I think there are scenarios in which an economic singularity could be with us within, say, 10 years. In other words, that the things we're seeing already with more people having AIs helping them in their jobs and then taking over more of their jobs, that is just the early ripples of the incoming tide, and suddenly it'll be there much more powerfully than we'd expected, which is why we have to think about it in advance, even though we can't say for sure when it's going to happen. And this is what a futurist does. A futurist shouldn't say, here's a date, it's all going to happen on this date, the 13th of September 2032. It's more like an air hostess when she gives the safety briefing. She doesn't say there is going to be a airplane disaster. She says, well, we hope it's not going to happen, but if it does happen, you need to know where to find your safety jacket. You need to know that you should look on the ground, on the floor, because there's going to be lights showing you the way to the nearest exit. And so that information is thought up in advance, is rehearsed in advance. And that's what we in the Omni Futurists are trying to do with the chapters in this book, trying to help people to think through, well, even if you don't think it's going to happen soon, at least be prepared so that if the canary signals are there, if canaries start falling off their perches, metaphorically, then we're able to react quickly, but not in a panic, because the one thing we definitely don't want in this situation is a panic and people jumping off to some superficially attractive but actually unhelpful and dangerous political solution to the economic singularity.
Another thing that your group does, and yourself as well, is in looking at future trends and possibilities, you're looking at past historical events as well. So I want to get into that briefly. I'm going to jump around my questions a little bit. But in the United States, Walmart was accused of displacing thousands of small businesses back in the 1990s by leveraging economies of scale to offer quote unquote low prices. So this to me seems like one historical precursor where basically just the supply chains that they had in place were able to overpower small businesses, right? But I mean, another trend, I guess, has been the aggregation of shopping into online marketplaces, which has also been accused of putting American businesses out of place. In this case, it seems to have really damaged shopping malls. And it did that by reducing foot traffic. People are buying things online through Amazon and other online venues, again, leveraging these economies of scale combined with just-in-time delivery options for perishable items. So it seems like some of the trends that are driving the economic singularity are already there. And again, they don't all appear to come from AI. Automation plays a large role in this. So it's a convergence of many different things, some of which have already impacted businesses, right?
Very good points. We're seeing one trend, which is the winner takes all scenario, or the winner takes most scenario, in which a company that's figured things out and is successful doesn't just have a local success, they can replicate their success much more easily globally. And in the past, if you look at things, people have studied this, if you look at things like how many piano manufacturers there were in a district, or how many piano tuners or whatever, there used to be lots of different companies who would offer these services. But as technology has progressed, as society has changed, the number of these different firms has shrunk, because the ones that are a little bit better don't just do better locally, they can take their successes globally. And so there is this growing trend of larger companies. But at the same time as the companies get larger, they often have fewer employees doing the work for them. And there is a comparison, I'm probably going to get some of the details wrong, but if you compare the three largest companies in Detroit, Motor City, round about, I'm going to guess, the year 1995, and you compare the three largest companies in Silicon Valley 20 years or so afterwards, the comparison works in such a way that the total revenues, inflation adjusted, for these two groups of three companies were about the same. So the Ford and General Motors and Chrysler were earning between them roughly the same as, and I'm not quite sure who the three largest companies in Silicon Valley were, but maybe Google and Apple and perhaps Microsoft. But the thing is that the three Silicon Valley companies had only about a tenth as many employees as these motor companies. And the comparison becomes even more striking when you look at the forward projection of value as assessed by share price, because the share values for these companies were over $1 trillion, which is much larger than for the motor companies. So why is this, that the small number of employees is able to have such a big effect? It's because of the leverage of technology. There are lots of employees, but nothing like as many as in the motor companies, and they can use their own software platforms to benefit. So in this winner takes most scenario, there will still be a small number of companies that are doing incredibly well, but we should not expect these small number of companies to be employing the most people. They will probably have a relatively small number of people, and the rest of us, if we're not careful, will be in the left behinds. In other words, the people who thought we were doing all right until it turns out we lost our jobs and there's nowhere to go. And this is coming fast for the people in the creative industry recently. Creative people often said, hey, I don't mind robots taking jobs because robots just do the dull, dirty, dangerous stuff.
Yeah.
And then later people said, well, actually, some robots can do some calculations, some robots can do some routine robotic things. They'll never do the really important human things like creativity and compassion and caring the cool stuff, the C's, if you like. Turns out, however, that a lot of the creative tasks can now be done by the new kind of generative AI. We still need some humans in there, but you don't need anything like as many humans before. So before you might have had a team of 10 creatives. Now you can get by with maybe a team of 2 creatives who are very good at using generative AI to come up with the pictures, the text, and now, with the latest release from OpenAI as an example, the videos that can be done much more cheaply than before. So many creatives who were previously confident their jobs would be safe are finding themselves also at risk of joining the left behinds. So that trend is there, and we're going to need to find a solution.
This reminds me of the metaphor in the frog in the boiling water, right? Where you turn the temperature up slowly and, the frog doesn't notice the gradual temperature change until it's far too late. And especially in the winner takes most scenario, where you have these, mega companies that are competing with each other as they get larger and more successful, the quest for efficiency itself pushes humans out of the loop and drives towards, again, automation, just-in-time delivery, offshoring materials, and a lot of these things that are damaging to, local economies, local employment, and jobs in general.
Entirely right. So we have to figure out the response to it. And some people are saying, let's stop the technology. The technology is going to cause these problems. Let's not do it. But that's not going to work, because even if some companies stop, other companies will jump in. And if some countries stop, other countries will jump in. And indeed, the benefits of technology, in many ways, are just so good. I do want better AI tutors, and I want better AI healthcare. I want healthcare that's cheaper and easier to access. So that will change the work of people in the education field. It will change the work of people in the medical field. And I don't think we can stop all of it. Others say, well, what we need to do then is be a little bit more intelligent. We need to stop some kinds of automation and promote others. I still think, however, what the solution is, we need to be better at distributing the fruits of this technology to everybody via something sometimes called a universal basic income, although I don't like that word basic because it suggests that people will just have quite a low quality of life. I prefer to think of it as a universal generous income, not a UBI, but a UGI, because although it may not be very large in absolute terms, it will be enough for us to have a very good quality of life. Why? Because all the things that we'll need, whether it's healthcare or education, whether it's accommodation, food, and consumer goods, so many of them will be available at much lower costs than ever before. How? Thanks to automation, thanks to the improvements in technology that I think we should encourage, but we can't do it unless we also restructure aspects of society to have more of the redistribution to everybody, that we're all in this together, rather than just a few winners being able to benefit and everybody else suffering incredibly.
Well, going to universal basic or universal generous income, and this is kind of off my questions list, but the world is looking at a transition, what they call demographic transition, right? Where birth rates in developed nations are already starting to drop below replacement levels, and that is predicted to happen, I believe, worldwide in the next century. I've seen predictions that human population may drop tenfold over the next 100 years. So if that's the case, we will become more reliant than ever on AI and automation. And that could dovetail into this. We may literally not have enough people for the jobs that are available in the future. So in a sense, if we can kind of make it through this challenging period, potentially there's a solution that will work out better. These automation and AI technologies are there to increase efficiency, improve product quality, improve our quality of life in many ways. If we're able to harness those effectively, this may overcome the fact that human population appears to be shrinking.
Well, there is a demographic challenge, certainly, which is that there are fewer people of working age to support ever larger numbers of people who have left the working population. And It used to be presented as a pyramid with a small number of very elderly people at the top and increasing numbers every decade that got younger. Well, it's no longer a pyramid. There's more of a bulge in the middle, and increasingly that bulge is moving to older age groups because you're right, many people decide against having children. That is posing huge problems, and technology is part of the answer there because many of the jobs can be done by automation. All sorts can be done. So we needn't worry on that account, provided there are still means to handle the transition. As you pointed out, there could be a good future ahead, but the most troubling time is, well, how do we adjust from where we are now to that possible much better future? And by the way, I'll say in that much better future, I don't think the population will be declining because I have hopes that many people who are getting on in life will have a rejuvenation, partly due to improved healthcare, partly driven by automation and technology, that we will all be made physically, biologically younger, even though we are chronologically older.
Well, I wanted to ask about possible backlash movements. Again, historical examples that came to mind. The first one was plastics. These were the material of the future when they first hit the market. Now they are perceived as cheap and inferior. GMO foods faced a similar backlash that inspired today's booming organic foods industry. So I'm wondering if the same thing could potentially happen to AI, where society responds to this automated surplus of goods and services through higher demand as well as compensation for actual human labor.
So that's touching on some solutions or possible solutions that are covered in the book Future Visions. So my view on this is there are plastics and there are plastics. Yes, there is cheap plasticky plastic, but there's other kinds of plastics that don't have that negative connotations. They look robust, they look like wood, they look like much more solid materials. So there may be a reaction against the cheaper, or superficially cheaper things, but people will be happy in many cases to do with more sophisticated replacements that are still low cost, but they don't appear to be cheap. It's the same with foods. Some of the changes in agriculture, changes in the way of growing food may have undesirable consequences, but we're going to get better at this. And there's going to be meat grown in labs, in cultivations, rather than grown on farms with the old-fashioned way of sentient animals. So I think there will be improvements to get round that kind of opposition. Now, there may still be some case for people buying things that are handmade. We sometimes do this. We think, well, we could buy the same good, the same item more cheaply if it's made by a factory, but we pay a little bit more provided it's made by a human, and it makes us feel good. But if the delta in cost is so significant, then there's going to be only a limited role for that kind of thing. Because if it's difference between £10 and £1,000, and there's a lot of things to be bought, we're not going to pay the £1,000 readily all that often. So I think there's only some scope for that solution working. There is, however, a different kind of backlash which we also need to consider, and that's the backlash against the adoption of technology by people who are sometimes called Luddites. Historically, the Luddites were named after probably an eponymous character, somebody who didn't really exist, Ned Ludd, as part of the reaction in the north of England in the early phase of the Industrial Revolution to the introduction of automated weaving machines, which meant that the highly paid, skilled human weavers no longer had such good wages because their work could be done by much lower paid workers with the help of machinery. And the Luddites didn't like that development at all. They reacted to what was a growing trend at the time, which was that wages were being depressed. And historians have called it the Engels Pause, named after not Karl Marx, but his co-author of the Communist Manifesto, Friedrich Engels, a factory owner in the north of England who did observe that wages were shrinking as a result of automation and other things. Now, that movement didn't get very far, but there may be modern versions of it too, which could be very destructive. And I don't imagine people are going to go and smash equipment up in quite the same way, but they might have other really nasty effects on society. So we've got to head that off, frankly. We must not see people so depressed, so frustrated, so anxious, so unhappy at the circumstances. We must do what eventually happened in 19th century England. It's not a great example in every aspect, but it has some good things we can learn from it, which was that the political class did expand the electorate in stages. More people were allowed to vote in stages, and there were things like support for the trade unions. There were laws against employing children working too young. There was factory inspectors who went round and ensured that the laws were followed. In other words, society reacted against the worst excesses of that growing inequality. And Britain avoided a large-scale revolution, although many other countries in the world did have terrible revolutions of various sorts over the years. So we can learn from that, which is that those of us who've still got a chance to influence how society operates, we should be speaking up intelligently, for the route to the sustainable superabundance involves intelligent, compassionate distribution of the benefits of it, rather than the benefits being hoarded by the people who might claim that they are the sole victors because they happen to be in the companies that have generated the biggest profits. Instead, we need sensible corporation tax and sensible developing universal basic income.
Well, David, on that note, let me thank you so much for your time today. Again, truly a pleasure and an honor to have you with me. This is a topic that definitely needs more consideration. I want to recommend that people look at the book. Again, it's Future Visions, How to Survive and Thrive in the Upcoming Economic Singularity, a variety of perspectives. There is also the Omni Futurist talk on YouTube, and those are going to be linked in the show notes. Let me close by asking what you anticipate seeing in the near future in terms of these economic changes. It looks like there is a growing cry about jobs out there already. And I want to ask what's coming up for you in this area or in your larger scope of futurism work in the next few months.
Well, we're going to see more surprises in the capabilities of AI. Sometimes AI is going to disappoint us, but in many cases it's going to produce better results than people had anticipated. And today people look at what the large language models do and they find fault in parts of it and say, look, these large language models can't really do this and that. Well, my prediction is within the next 12 months, most of the criticisms that these models are facing will no longer be valid, because the models will include not just their current intuitive reasoning, but increasing rationality as well. They'll be able to reflect on what they're about to say before they say it. They'll be able to fact check it. And so I think they'll be better in all aspects in many of these jobs. So that's coming. We'll also see the greater use of robots in healthcare, not just the robots that are doing surgery or the robots that are helping discover treatments and diagnosing problems, but the ones that are taking care of people who are maybe suffering from dementia, people who are suffering from loneliness, people who are difficult to be moved around hospitals. We will have social robots filling some of these roles increasingly. And at the beginning, some people may say, yuck, I don't want to be looked after by a social robot. But when it turns out that these social robots can actually make people's lives much better, there'll still be a role, of course, for human-human interaction, but many of the more strenuous parts of looking after people in these circumstances will be done by robots as well. So as more and more of these jobs are taken, as roles are filled, increasingly politicians will even be asking themselves, well, we do need to move in a different direction. And I hope that these politicians will look at this year's book, Future Visions, but they should look out for Future Visions 2025. I'm not sure what the name of the book will be then, but a new version will be coming out with some new authors, people who read the 2024 version and already want to join the debate. So you can contact the Omni Futurist and join the production for their next book in that series, and maybe that will be the one that is even more comprehensive and compelling and engaging solutions in it.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much for your time today, sir.
My pleasure.